Hello, everyone. Welcome to this Oxford World Classics, Oxford English Faculty webinar. Today, we're going to be talking about the second part of King Henry VI. So we'll get to that and to my guest who has introduced this volume in the Oxford World Classics series, Dr. Kavita Mudan Finn, in a moment. Firstly, just a little bit of housekeeping of how these webinars run. I can see from the names in the attendees list some very familiar faces, and we do really appreciate you coming back. It's really great to see you. If you're not familiar with how we run this, what happens is that in this case, Kavita and I will chat for about 45 or 50 minutes. We've got an hour and 15 minutes in total, about different aspects of the play and how she came to write her introduction. And we'll be open throughout for questions that you can put in the Q&A. So the Q&A button should be at the bottom of your screen. I'll keep an eye on those, and we may take some as we go along, but really we'll come to those at the end. It's great if you've got questions as you're listening, rather than waiting right till the last minute. We'll get to as many of those as we can. Our work for the Oxford World's Classic Shakespeare is absolutely indebted to the new Oxford Shakespeare, a great big scholarly project directed by Gary Taylor, John Jowett, Terry Boras, and Gabriel Egan. And that exists currently in 3 big volumes with all kinds of information about everything that we talk about in much, much more detail. And you'll notice that the World's Classics texts are really quite stripped down. We've designed them for people to enjoy reading, not too burdened with notes, with a glossary that helps you with things that might be difficult to understand. And most importantly, an introduction which is current and lively and gives ways of thinking about the play. In particular, the editorial work for Henry VI, Part 2, was done by Rory Loughnane, and that's work that we want to shout out. And Kavita Mudan Finn has written an absolutely excellent introduction. Kavita is an independent scholar, has worked extensively on medievalism, on sort of popular Tudor forms, on queens and queenship. And I absolutely wanted her to do this. And I'm just going to read one sentence from her introduction, which will clarify for you why I wanted her to do it. This is her advice for how to deal with Henry VI Part 2. Embrace its success, occasional clumsiness, and obvious scaffolding. Perhaps even think of it as a work of transformative fan fiction. What an amazingly clever head banging thing to say that is. Think of it as a work of transformative fan fiction, co-authored by 2 of the greatest writers working in Elizabethan London. So you can just see there the kind of framework that Kavita brings, which is so fresh and so interesting, draws so interestingly on contemporary culture, as well as being deeply historically alert, and so on. So I'm really, really looking forward to the conversation. Kavita, I've talked about you and at you, so thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been a pleasure to write, and I'm looking forward to chatting about it.
Fantastic. So, why was this, what did you feel about sort of setting out on writing this introduction? I mean, it might feel that part 2 of a 3-part is a bit of a, sort of squeeze in between other things. Tell me how that struck you.
Well, I partly it's because I've never really thought of this play as part 2. Even when I first read it, it feels like an opening to something. And partly I think that's just how it was originally conceived. When it was originally written, I am certain, and I know that this is part of what the Oxford editors have been talking about in this most recent edition, is the fact that part 2 was almost certainly written first. The quarto edition of part 2 is referred to as the first part of the contention. So that kind of indicates that this was the first part, and then part 3 came afterward. And it was only after the success of parts 2 and 3 that we got the prequel, which is now known as part 1. So I feel like we have ended up with a little bit of confusion in the modern editorial sense, but at the time, it probably made more sense.
Yeah, no, that's a really good reminder. Do you feel then that this play doesn't need us to know anything in advance necessarily? We can take it.
No.
Yeah.
Not really. It basically introduce it starts at a very convenient point in time. It starts with a wedding, and a wedding is a wonderful place to just introduce absolutely everyone involved.
Hmm.
And so I think it actually works as a wonderful introduction to all of these characters. And you really learn as much as you need to know within the opening scene about where everyone fits, who the factions are, and how everything is just going to turn horrifically wrong within a period of several scenes.
Okay, I'm going to come to who those people are in a minute, but I'm just still just wanting actually to encourage people to feel this is an accessible play. It doesn't need a
Yes.
great run up of prep. You can start it when it starts. You can you can read through your introduction and start. Do you think so? You said that part two probably written first. The first part of the contention suggests a second part was always planned. Do you feel this is a play, part two, that we call part two, um, that needs something to come after it? We've said it doesn't need anything before it, but does it feel like an episode that is going to have a sequel?
Yes, it absolutely does. It just ends. It's building all of these things. You have an entire popular rebellion that takes over the entirety of Act 4. And then Act 5, they have barely managed to clear up that mess when a whole additional one is about to start. And the play essentially ends on, we're about to go into battle, and that's it.
Okay.
So, um,
So it's a
it,
cliffhanger forward, but not
yes,
not back. Great.
yes.
And it's we're early in Shakespeare's career, aren't we? Where would you how would you help situate us in terms of what he has written or what's coming?
This has to be one of the earliest plays.
Yeah.
I don't know if I would necessarily go so far as to say that I think it's the absolute earliest. This one and Two Gentlemen of Verona are kind of sitting in the same, I think, time, sitting in the same time zone,
Okay.
really. But this is definitely one of the earliest plays, and I think we can tell that just because of how much is crammed into it. And this, I have to admit, this is something that I have come to listening to a lot of analysis of sort of modern popular literature, because one of the things I've seen is that if you look at, for instance, debut authors who are working within a new fictional genre for the first time, one of the things that happens is that they try to cram everything that they love about that particular genre into a single play. And if you look at Henry VI Part 2, it is such a crowded play. There is so much in it. And I almost feel that it's one of those plays, it began as a single play, but then it grew. And I feel like sort of it was one of those where the tale grew in the telling. And where you start off with one play and then you realize you have too much for a single play and you have to add a second one. And two-part plays were actually, as you know, fairly standard at this point in time, or at least they weren't unusual. You had Marlowe with kind of Tamburlaine parts one and two. A little later on, you have, I think, Thomas Heywood does Edward IV part one and two. Heywood actually does a bunch of two-part plays later on. So I think even if it wasn't necessarily the prevailing trend at the time, having multi-part plays wasn't unheard of.
Hmm. And the your edition, your book and the New Oxford Shakespeare that we're building on attributes it to William Shakespeare, Christopher Marlowe, and others. Um,
Yes.
and your that bravura sort of sentence that I just read out, acknowledges here are two great writers, or one very well established great writer, and perhaps in Marlowe, and perhaps a newbie um, in Shakespeare. Does that? It often feels to me that the authorship of these plays is something we can get absolutely bogged down in, or we can sort of ignore it. Do you feel, are you in either of those camps, or do you feel there's a sort of middle way? What do you think we need to know about its authorship?
I think if we accept that it's multi-authored, I think that's sort of the main thing we need to that we need to kind of sit on is the fact that it is almost certainly a multi-authored play. It does not feel like a play that has a single author. There's too much going on and there's too many almost I don't want to say conflicting because they're not, but there are so many different voices and they're all kind of speaking to and around and on top of one another. So I feel that it's definitely a collaborative work. Now, how the nature of that collaboration is entirely up to question. Was it one of those where some people like to say that each playwright took several scenes and they each kind of wrote out the scenes entirely. Other people say, okay, each playwright picked up a different character and they wrote sort of the dialogue just for that particular character and they were going back and forth. There are so many ways that there's so many ways that this collaboration could have taken place. I mean, I have to admit, there's a part of me that loves the idea of two playwrights sitting in a tavern throwing ideas back and forth to one another, which again, it it's not too dissimilar, I think, and I'm pretty sure it's either Gary Taylor or Gabriel Egan who mentions this in one of the introductory essays to the Oxford Shakespeare. But one of them likens it to almost a television writer's room where you have a group of writers who none of whom is individually responsible for everything, but it's almost the conversation between those writers that becomes the final screenplay. So I wonder if that is almost how this play came into being, where you had several different writers kind of all influencing it in different ways, and it's the collective that we end up with.
I wonder if we're actually at a point because of the popularity and the quality, the superb quality of television drama produced in that way. Maybe that's given us a slightly more open-minded sense of how collaboration might work. Because I think
Mhm.
if people read sort of older accounts of this, um, they will be struck by what a sort of deficit model. There are problems with this. This must be. I mean, I love the fact that you say this must be collaborative, or the sort of textual evidence that this is collaborative is the jostle of voices rather than a sense that it's, broken or inconsistent or something. It's so striking how many of those negative depictions have come to be explained away by collaboration. Whereas, as I say, I wonder if that writer's room sense makes us feel, okay, this will be a standard way. It would be very odd for one person to author a TV series. I mean, just in terms of the amount of work and how would they do that? We wouldn't expect that. And maybe our expectation that one person would author this multivocal play is also quite odd when you think about it.
Yeah, and it is very interesting also because when you think about how quickly these plays were being written and how quickly they were being rehearsed and how much turnover there was between performances, um, trying to imagine a single person being able to write a play in a matter of weeks, rehearse that play, probably be part of that performing group in some way, shape, or form, whether it's prompting or even acting. In the case of Shakespeare in particular, um, I don't think it's possible for a single person to do all of that work.
Yeah.
And there are also a number of records of Philip Henslowe, the theater owner, paying multiple writers for the same play. So if you are having it, I think if you have kind of the financial records that support multiple people being played for the same play, you can get the sense that there were these kind of multiple influences, multiple voices coming in. Now, there is a question in the Q&A about sort of a specific example of the multiple voices. And partly, I think it comes back to what you were saying, Emma, about earlier critics who look at this play and they say, this verse doesn't sound like Shakespeare's, or this line doesn't sound like something Shakespeare would say, or this line sounds more like Marlowe, or that line sounds more like Thomas Nash. And there's a certain amount that you can do with that, but after a point, it kind of just gets nitpicky, and I'm not certain that you really get anywhere by trying to sort of pick out particular bits of phrasing that are associated with any one particular writer. Um, but what I think you can do is look at the works of these other writers as a whole, and you can see these are the kinds of things that they were interested in. These, like, Marlowe was writing Dr. Faustus around this time period. What can we potentially see with the way that witchcraft is incorporated into 2 Henry VI? We have Thomas Nash, who was writing Pierce Penniless at this point in time, and who was talking about kind of people going around people going around the city comedies, that kind of thing. How can we see some of those elements popping up in, say, the Jack Cade scenes with all of these kind of commoner characters running around? Um, To Henry VI is really interesting, even within the Henry VI plays, because it has this huge element of city commoners.
Brilliant.
Yeah,
Let's spend a bit
that's
of time now because I took
sure.
us off into the kind of serial element of it and
Mhm.
the kind of fan fiction element. Um,
Yeah.
let's acknowledge that one of the lovely things about our conversation is that perhaps there are people who haven't had a chance to see this play and perhaps have not, almost certainly won't have studied it and so on. So we don't tend to do a plot summary, and it'd be quite a job. But what are the elements? What's this play about? Who's in it? How would you begin to sort of describe it to somebody who doesn't know it?
Well, I like to say that it is a play that starts with a wedding and ends with a civil war. So we begin with the what is supposed to be a wonderful occasion, the marriage of King Henry VI to his new wife, Margaret of Anjou. Now, Margaret of Anjou is the niece of the French king, and on paper, she seems like a great idea. Unfortunately, it turns out that she is not such a great idea because within the space of the first scene, we discover, or within the space of the first act even, we discover that she's actually carrying on an affair with one of Henry's courtiers, the Earl of Suffolk, who eventually becomes the Duke of Suffolk. And she is power hungry in her own right. She doesn't think that her husband is sufficiently in charge of the country, and she is of the opinion that he needs to strengthen his rule. And in the meantime, we have a number of different factions that have formed within Henry's court. And that is because Henry himself is not a very strong-willed individual. He became king when he was a baby. And so he has essentially been a figurehead monarch, and the rule of his kingdom has been primarily left to two of his uncles, one of whom is already dead at the beginning of this play, and the other of whom is the Lord Protector, Humphrey, Duke of Gloucester. And the Duke of Gloucester is an important character for the first three acts of the play, after which he dies, and his death kind of causes the rest of the action of the play to explode. Because he was essentially the one figure who was holding this whole mess together. And as soon as he dies, everything falls apart. You end up with a popular rebellion in Act 4 that almost topples Henry off his throne. He manages to regain things just in time. But in the final act, we discover that he is actually going to have to face his cousin, Richard of York, in battle, because Richard of York has decided that he wants the throne. And I am not going to get into how he justifies his claim for the throne because ultimately it does not matter. What matters is that he shows up and he has support from the nobility, he has several very powerful allies, and he has an army. And so we end Henry VI Part 2 with these two factions, Henry VI and Queen Margaret on the side of the House of Lancaster, and Richard of York and his sons on the side of the House of York. And thus we go into Henry VI Part 3, which is the bulk of what we now know as the Wars of the Roses.
Hmm. Hmm. Wonderfully done. Really, really wonderfully done. So we've got a king who is not the center of the drama. And I suppose, sort of thinking a little bit back to what we were saying about the theatre world of the very early 1590s, um, we've got a super sort of ensemble piece, haven't we? We've got lots of the kind of character distribution or lines distribution that we come to associate with comedy, where you've got lots of people holding, carrying the play, and we tend to think of, tragic history as being organized around one big main actor. But really, we've got ensemble playing here, haven't we? And lots of different characters sort of coming to the fore. Um, and I love the way you start it because it also brings out for us, which is another reason I knew you would be great for this particular task, um, the importance of women to the historical world. In fact, Shakespeare's later history plays, which people tend to like more or think are more organized, don't have much less interest in much less interesting women, much less interesting women characters. Um, you mentioned Margaret of Anjou. Could you just talk a bit about more about her, or about the Duchess of Gloucester, or
Well, the women in this play are amazing. Granted, there are only two of them. You have Margaret and you have Eleanor of Gloucester, and you have, I think, a couple of very small kind of female parts who pop up from time to time. But the primary ones are Margaret and Eleanor, and they are both wonderful, wonderful roles. Margaret, in particular, is an absolute juggernaut of a role. She shows up in four different plays. She shows up in part Henry VI, part one, two, three, and Richard III.
exactly
Um,
move over
yeah,
Falstaff? I mean, she is the
exactly.
biggest serial role that Shakespeare writes, and he brings her back when historically she's absolutely long gone, isn't she? In Richard III, we can't
Yeah.
lose her. We can't let her go. Yeah.
No, he absolutely brings her back after she's historically dead so that she can rant at everyone in Richard III, and it's amazing. And you could tell because, and I wonder how much of this was because people loved her as a character. Because when you think about it, there is a very easy way to just finish in Henry VI Part 3. She doesn't have to come back at all. And everyone is shocked when she shows up. Everyone said, "Wait, we thought you were dead." And Margaret says, "No, I'm still here to yell at all of you." And it's such an amazing appearance. And it's one of those things that it breaks my heart every time I see a production cut her from Richard III, because they do it all the time. And one of the main reasons they do it, I think, is because the main reason Margaret is there is to bring this weight of history into Richard III. Because Richard III is at its heart a play about a man who is trying to outrun all of that history. He is trying to remake it and he is trying to rewrite it such that he can become the King of England. And Margaret is one of those few forces who is just back there saying, "No, no, you can't do this. I'm not going to let you do this."
Yeah, she's a tragic version, isn't she? Of he's not the Messiah. He's a very naughty boy.
Yes,
She's the sort of
yes.
mother who won't allow him into it. Yeah, it's amazing that we are heading towards Richard III, but we're such a long way from it in the way this play is written. Yeah, Margaret's an absolutely amazing character. And tell us about Eleanor of Gloucester.
Eleanor of Gloucester, historically speaking, should not be in this play either. Shakespeare brings her in because she's such a perfect foil for Margaret. Historically speaking, the events of this play are supposed to start in 1445. Eleanor of Gloucester had already been imprisoned by then. She'd been in prison for 4 years. But in order to create this wonderful tension in the opening half of the play, the playwrights chose to keep Eleanor and Margaret and basically let them interact with each other just long enough that Margaret can engineer Eleanor's downfall, or at least Margaret, with the help of her various allies, can engineer Eleanor's downfall. And all of this was implied in the sources that Shakespeare was using. These were all coming out of historical chronicles and also um, a series of poetry collections called The Mirror for Magistrates. And the thing to remember about a lot of these historical texts is that they themselves were peddling a very particular narrative. And in the case of Eleanor and Margaret, the narrative was Eleanor of Gloucester dabbled in witchcraft because she wanted her husband to become king, and she paid the price for it by being accused of treason and going to prison. Margaret of Anjou also wanted her husband to be extremely powerful and to be the monarch that she believed he ought to be. She paid the price by losing absolutely everything, including her husband, her family, her crown, ultimately her life. Um, so both of these women are being set forth as cautionary tales, but they are such compelling characters all the same. And
Yes,
you
they're like the
just
femme
can't.
fatale, aren't they? Which
Mhm.
never really works as a cautionary tale.
Mm-mm.
In the sort of 30s and 40s Hollywood movies, that you think she's having these vampish characters having such a great time. You sort of forget that it all goes badly wrong in the last 5 minutes. You just think about the than wearing the furs and drinking coops of champagne and so on. Or maybe that's just me. I think about that. Um,
I think about Margaret of Anjou that way too.
yeah, that's amazing. That she so they're sort of moralizing figures, but a bit adrift,
Yeah.
or
Well, and
or a bit
even
in excess
yeah.
of what would make what would be absolutely moral. Yeah.
Yeah, and honestly, so many of the characters in this play are just awful human beings. They are absolutely awful. And the thing about the women is that they fit right in. There is nothing about them that differentiates them from these other power-hungry men around them. They are behaving exactly the same way. The only person who doesn't is ironically Henry VI. And maybe that's because he's been kind of imbued with this power from the start, so he's never had to fight for it. But also because he's never had to fight for it, he doesn't quite understand the value or the importance of it and allows himself to be led in whatever direction pleases him at the time, which makes him an incredibly dangerous monarch because he can just be pointed however anyone wants him to be pointed.
Hmm. And the one other element that I'd love to hear your take on is the Jack Cade rebellion. So we talk a lot about, what was Shakespeare's attitude to democracy, say in the Roman plays. We get that, don't we? And but we've got this incredible depiction here. How do you feel? I mean, it's got the most famous line from the play, hasn't it? About first thing we'll do, we'll kill all the lawyers.
Yeah.
What about Jack Cade? Is he a voice of popular unrest, or is he a puppet of these courtly wars? Do you think?
The latter, I think a lot more so. I feel that Jack Cade believes himself to be a lot more powerful than he actually is. Because Jack Cade he's sort of bookended and he's framed in many ways by the Duke of York. The Duke of York is the one who introduces him. Um, we have this scene where he has just caused a bunch of mischief. He has just gotten himself involved in the downfall of the Duke of Gloucester, but he is leaving the country conveniently so that he can't be accused of having been involved in that. But before he leaves the country, he has this speech that he delivers only to the audience. It's a complete soliloquy. And it really kind of almost prefigures some of the speeches we get from Richard III in part three and in Richard III, because Richard of York is bringing the audience into his conspiracy. And he's saying, I have this guy. His name is Jack Cade. He will do whatever I tell him to do, and he will not stop. If I point him in a direction, he will go and he won't stop, no matter what anyone does to him. And he really emphasizes the fact that Cade is stubborn. It's like, say that they torture him, say that they rack him. He will say nothing about me. He will completely insist that this was entirely his own idea. And that is exactly what Jack Cade does. Like, even when there's a character who says, Jack Cade, the Duke of York, had taught you this, Cade just sort of shrugs and goes, no, no, he didn't. I made it up myself.
Yeah.
And so he's the perfect co-conspirator for York because he takes all the credit for himself. And I think even at the very end, even before he dies, spoiler, he dies, even before he dies, um, he is still somehow of the opinion that he can still win this. So I believe that Jack Cade is very powerful in his own head, but we as the audience are well aware of the the boundaries around his power.
That's so interesting. I remember seeing a sort of performance workshop about the two versions of Jack Cade's death. Um, and it was about in one version of the text, he is very diminished, isn't he? And he's crawling around, eating, so hungry and is on the run and eating sort of grass and leaves. And he is set upon by the landowner and his men. So that was a really interesting example because it was very hard to see a man just so desperately hungry, he's on his hand and knees eating, being attacked by other people and not feel sympathetic to the man,
Yeah.
whatever else
Mhm.
is done. And then another version where, in fact, he is in single combat with Alexander Eden, with the nobleman, and there it's much more, well, it's either evenly balanced or you don't feel particularly sympathetic towards him. And it's really, really stuck in my mind as a way of thinking about how very small things about how we represent um, the rebellion can sort of tweak where the audience's sympathy is. What does Jack Cade think he wants from the rebellion? What is he actually asking for?
Well, I think that there's a very big difference between what Jack Cade claims to be asking for and what
Mm,
Jack Cade is actually asking for. Jack Cade himself, see, at least to me, seems to fall into exactly the same trap as all of the power-hungry nobles in the play. He gets a taste of power and he doesn't want to let it go.
mhm,
But I do think that when this rebellion starts, there is a lot of justification behind it. Even when he is saying these absolutely outrageous things, um, he still has a point. So there's this particular point where he's speaking to the Clerk of Chartham, and the Clerk of Chartham is just a random guy in London. He's a clerk. He knows how to write, and he is basically brought before mob justice because he knows how to write, because he's seen as an enemy, as a member of the educated classes. And the clerk is basically saying, no, I haven't done anything wrong. I just happen to know how to write my own name. And Cade makes this very interesting response to that, where he talks about how the skin of an innocent lamb should be made parchment, and parchment being scribbled o'er should undo a man. And he's essentially saying that if you don't know how to read, you can write your name on something and have no idea what you have just signed your name to. Um, and I think in our age of predatory loans and things like that, that is an entirely sympathetic perspective to take. Unfortunately, he then goes in exactly the wrong direction with it and says, okay, we're just going to kill everyone, which is not the answer. So,
yes.
yeah.
Yes, and you can see the point about kill all the lawyers,
Mhm.
which
Yeah.
sometimes people gloss that, don't they, with these extraordinary figures. I don't have them to hand, but about the amount of litigation in Elizabethan London, which is just extraordinarily huge, isn't it? Everybody seems to have
Hmm.
been going to law every year for something. I mean, including Shakespeare and the Shakespeare family,
Yes.
and that must have been an era. I mean, it still resonates now about, the people who get rich out of these things. It's work for
Hmm.
lawyers, but that must have
Yeah.
also resonated with the audience for a moment at least. It has an element of truth to it as well as, or an element of sympathetic engagement to it as well as everything else.
Yeah, and it is the I think that that particular line, it has a lot of resonance. And unfortunately, what happens afterward is that Cade actually undermines it himself, because later on he says, "We will burn all of the parliamentary records, and my mouth shall be the Parliament of England," which, if you get rid of all the lawyers, who is going to interpret all of the laws? And if Jack Cade is the only one interpreting all of the laws, does that not immediately become a case of tyranny? So
Yeah,
Cade
that's
on the
interesting.
so
It
Cade
feels
on the
so
one
resonant,
hand, yeah,
doesn't it?
it
Sort of
really
popular
does.
protests being themselves forms of tyranny or being puppeted by tyrants. I mean, could we
Yeah.
ever think of anything like that happening in our own time? Absolutely not at all.
Hmm.
Never. Um,
Yeah.
and so I suppose I wanted to think for a bit, Kavita, about how you feel this play fits or doesn't fit into a larger sweep of history plays, or of history plays as something that Shakespeare's writing through the 1590s. This feels, just from the conversation we're having, like a more, as you said, a more packed and a more multivocal form of history than we tend to get in the later plays.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. And I think part of that is just a matter of experience. Like this is the first one he's writing. He's writing it in a collaboration with several other, he's writing it in collaboration with at least one and possibly several other playwrights. And this is sort of what I mean, even if it is not the first play that he wrote, it is almost certainly the first history play that he wrote. And history plays are their own kind of weird hybrid genre. You get historical comedies, you get historical romances, you get historical tragedies. Like historical tragedies seem to be the most kind of common that you find, but I feel like like even as kind of a type of play, it spans all of the different genres as well. And this play just has so much packed into it. But it is also a very much an ensemble play. You don't have a main character. The closest thing you get to a main character is probably Richard of York, and even he does not have that many more lines than Margaret.
Mm.
So, um, it is a great play to kind of show off a company rather than necessarily showing off one specific actor.
Hmm. Yeah, that's really interesting, and I suppose that there's lots to say about the particular formation of Shakespeare's company before the big, what's often seen as a perhaps over-interpreted as a big moment in the sort of incorporation of the Chamberlain's Men in 1594, and that the plays before that have a different quality and have a different set of priorities and so on. And I feel as if this play and the discussion that we're having really brings that out. And so when Shakespeare comes to the earlier plays in historical time that come later in his own career, he's got a different set of audiences, perhaps, or a different set of things that he wants to do. But I love that sense that we are struggling towards Richard and his, tyrannical, fascistic control over his own play, not just over England, but the dominance of Richard as a character um, really aligns political and theatrical power, doesn't it? And in a way, we're seeing a previous play where theatrical and political power are both dispersed across lots of different agents.
Yes. Yeah, and of course, Richard III is oh so briefly introduced in this play. He shows up for about two lines in the final scene. And it's this really interesting moment where York's sons just pop on stage and they're only there for a couple of lines, but you can tell that they're there because they are about to become incredibly important.
Yes. Okay, so
And
that's the
yeah,
serial technique, isn't it? I mean, we
yes,
all recognize that from serial forms in our own day, that the last
yes.
5 minutes opens up a new vista and you think, okay, I see what you did
Mhm.
there. Yeah,
Yeah,
very,
because
very,
Richard of
very
York
interesting.
dies. Like Richard
Mm,
of York dies, Somerset dies. There are a bunch of the kind of primary movers and shakers in this play. They're all dead by the end of Act Five, and we have a whole new set of. Well, not Richard of York doesn't die, but everyone else does. Richard of
yeah.
York is one of the few who actually survives into the opening of Henry VI Part Three. But then, of course, he doesn't last very long after that,
Mm,
when he is basically supplanted by his own sons.
yes. Yeah. Yes. It's a you said nobody's very it's full of horrible people. Do you think um I mean, I don't even know why I'm asking this question because I would always say this isn't a very good question, but I'll just ask it anyway. I mean, does it have a message, this play? I mean, does it have a moral? I don't know.
I don't know. I mean, if I had to pick one, I would say that it is a play about how dangerous it is when you have a power vacuum, and how dangerous it can be when you have a bunch of self-interested actors who are all willing to essentially double cross each other in order to secure as much power as possible. It is it's a very cynical play. It is an incredibly cynical play about political rhetoric in a lot of ways. There are so many moments where characters will absolutely flat out lie, and the audience is the only one who knows that they're lying. Everyone else on stage believes them.
Yeah.
And that, but all of these conspirators, all of these bad actors are sharing their plans with the audience, and that I think is where a lot of this tension comes from, because
Yeah.
it's really implicating the audience in all of the tragedy that is to come.
Yes, it's a really unheroic play, isn't it? Both in its
Yes.
tone and its structure. And I love how you've emphasized the sense that the audience has an access to that which is probably quite uncomfortable in a way, or sort of a bit unremitting. Yeah,
Hmm.
absolutely. And there
Well,
are
and
other ways, just the conversation we've been having anticipates uh, later plays, doesn't it? It feels hard not to see a bit of Lady Macbeth somehow in Eleanor of Gloucester. Um, Hard not to see maybe the rioters in Coriolanus. I don't know somehow. Where do you see where do you see the sort of afterlife of this in the canon?
oh, lots. I think definitely you can see kind of Jack Cade's rebellion being reshaped in plays like Julius Caesar and Coriolanus. Because, of course, in Coriolanus, it's interesting because the commoners are actually a lot more sympathetic in that play. I think that they are necessarily in this play. This play, they don't get a lot of time.
Mm,
They are basically, there are a couple of different commoner scenes, and initially you can tell that they're intended primarily for comic relief. And there's actually one of the questions about this in the Q&A. So there are a couple of different commoner scenes in this play. The first sort of group of commoners that we encounter are the people who are conspiring with Eleanor of Gloucester. So you have like there's a witch, there's a couple of sort of dodgy sorcerer types, and then there's John Hume, who is the guy who is essentially setting all of this up for her. And the thing about John Hume is that when he is introduced to us, he immediately comes out to the audience and says, I'm double crossing everyone. I am actually working for the Duke of Suffolk, and the Duke of Suffolk is trying to bring down the Duchess of Gloucester. So when I'm over here telling the Duchess of Gloucester that she should become queen, I'm doing this to feather my nest. And then, of course, as soon as the Duchess goes down, Hume goes down with her. Everybody gets punished, except for Suffolk, at least for the time being. And so you have a couple of other scenes that pop up. You have commoners coming in, but every time they're coming in, they're almost always being manipulated by one of the members of the nobility. So, for instance, there's an apprentice and a master. The master is accused of having made some statement about how the Duke of York should be the king, and his apprentice brings this accusation against the master because the apprentice has his own beef with the master. And so they're basically playing on personal grievances to try and push these different political agendas. And they're using the commoners like puppets.
mm,
So I think by the time you get to the popular rebellion, you can see why the Commons is so mad. You can see why all of these people are ready to just burn down the city of London because they feel like they cannot be heard.
mm. There's definitely some questions to come back to about Cade,
Mhm.
but I thought before we
Yes.
go to questions, so do put your questions in if you're thinking about them. Maybe we just look at the slide. We
Yeah.
always look at a slide, and uh, I have here we are. Let's just look at this play from start. Here we are. So I hope people can see that. Um, to orient us a bit, Kavita, and tell me why you picked this particular exchange for the one to just focus on for a couple of minutes.
So the reason that I really like this exchange, it is not a very well-known one. It's from Act 4, Scene 1, but it, I think, offers a beautiful microcosm of the class conflict that's happening in this play. So what happens is that the Duke of Suffolk, who we have seen up to this point, like he has been a mover, a shaker, he has been having an affair with Queen Margaret, he has been causing all kinds of problems at court, and he has just been exiled for having masterminded the death of the Duke of Gloucester. Now, he and Queen Margaret have just had this incredibly impassioned romantic farewell, which I will be honest, feels very, very strange at that particular point of the play. But Margaret has just bid him farewell. Suffolk is off to France. She has promised him that she is going to work to bring him back to England as soon as possible. So we open on a ship, and it's a random ship in the middle of the English Channel, and they found a bunch of prisoners, and one of them happens to be the Duke of Suffolk in disguise. So this man, Walter Whitmore, is in charge of this ship. He is not necessarily a pirate, but he might also be a pirate. We don't necessarily know. But Suffolk comes in and he says, I'm a gentleman. I'm the Duke of Suffolk, and you're going to get a really good ransom for me if you let me go. And Whitmore immediately responds to him by saying, no, actually, you are the reason for all of our problems. You are the reason that King Henry VI is not ruling the way that he's supposed to be. You are the reason that the Duke of Gloucester is dead. You are the reason that, oh, by the way, there's this rebellion that's starting up in Kent that you may not have known about, but you are the reason for it. And Suffolk, utterly failing to read the room, responds with this rant saying, I am your better. I can step on your head. I am so much more important than you. Whitmore's response is, nope, I'm just going to cut off your head. And so you end up with this microcosm of class relations. You've got the nobility fighting the commoners, and then the commoners are finally, it's like, okay, we're done. We're done. We have lost all of our patience. We are just going to start chopping off heads. And that is how we start Cade's Rebellion. This is basically the opening of Cade's Rebellion.
Hmm. Hmm. That's amazing. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. I'm going to stop sharing that and let's pick up some of the questions. So we've got a couple of questions about the Cade. In fact, we've got three, and I'm just going to read them all out, and then let's see where you'd like to go, Kavita. So, hi Dan, it's good to see you. Dan asks about the popular perspectives in the play, reading the Cade Revolt in relation to the false miracle earlier on. And then he says the perpetrators are punished, but not before protesting that they did it for pure need, a term often capable of performing surprising reorientations of sympathy. And I was thinking about that when you talked about how are the commoners more sympathetic in Coriolanus, and it's partly because they're hungry, aren't they? They're food riots in
Mhm.
Coriolanus. And then Chris, hi Chris, any parallels do you think between Cade's preference for the spoken over the written word and the process the playwrights have gone through in transmuting written chronicles into rowdy drama, which is quite a nice um, uh, chiasmus there. And then Shabanka, it's nice to see you, Shabanka. How did the rebel scenes in Henry VI too escape the attention of the master of the revels? Making the comparison with Thomas More, the Thomas More scenes in that partly Shakespearean play. Was it because the dissident sentiments were diffused in comedy?
Mhm.
So, uh, spoken and written, censorship, and sort of pure need and the false miracle. Anything you would like to pick up on there?
Oh, that's a lot of different interesting threads. So, first of all, yes, absolutely. I think there are varying levels of sympathy that we end up seeing towards the commons. And I do think in that false miracle scene, which I'll explain just a little bit, there's a scene in Act Two of the play where a group of commoners come on stage claiming that a miracle has just happened and a blind man can see. And the nobles are very skeptical of this, and they do ultimately manage to break down this story and make it clear that no, 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 this person was faking. But they have this line at the very, very end when these commoners are hustled off stage and told, "You're going to be beaten, you're going to be punished, you're going to be condemned for having tried to trick us." And one of them turns around and says, "Sir, but we did it for pure need." And we have already seen a couple of bits of dialogue earlier on where where members of the Commons are coming on stage and they are petitioning and they're saying, we need help. You're enclosing our fields. They specifically mention the enclosure of public lands. And the enclosure of public lands was a huge deal at this time because it was essentially making it impossible for anyone who did not own land to graze their animals on it or to improve it in any way. So people were starving. And I do think that this is being kind of being hinted at in a lot of these scenes. And I do think we are, up to a point, expected to feel sympathy for the commoners. What happens, though, partway through Cade's rebellion is that they go too far. They start just indiscriminately killing everyone. There's a scene in the Quarto text, which does not make it into the Folio text, but there is a scene in the Quarto text where Jack Cade essentially tells one of his lieutenants, "Oh, you can assault this woman and murder her husband." And essentially gives him permission to do that and sends him on his way. And there are a number of other instances where Cade is going to say, you need to burn down all of the parliamentary statutes. We're not going to know what any of the laws are. I'm the only one who's going, my mouth shall be the Parliament of England. I'm the only one who can now say what the law is. That, of course, is a huge problem. Nobody wants that. As for the censorship question, that's a very interesting one because it is true that the that plays were being censored at this period. And I do think that the fact that these scenes are meant to be sort of large, overall, kind of broadly comic. I think that was how they got away with it because there is so much. These scenes are incredibly funny. They're very uncomfortably funny, but they are very funny. So I think the comedy was partly how they got away with it.
Mm. Great. Um, and we've got a question asking about how far the history plays are overseen by the government. I mean,
Mhm.
at this point, all plays need to be licensed, don't they, for performance? And history plays become wrapped up in the bishop's ban at the end of the 1590s, more specifically. But at this point, I don't think they have any special surveillance, do they? That it's just what all the plays have in order to be performed.
Yeah, it was nothing specific to history plays at this point in time. That was
Yeah.
only, I think, later when people started getting in trouble for them.
You mentioned already in that Cade example one of the ways that the Quarto, that play called The First Contention, and the Folio text, which is titled as we have come to title this play now, the second part of Henry VI, are different. Lynn asks a bit more about how different they are,
Mhm.
um, and I wonder if there's anything else you want to talk about. I think so. Lynn says, is it more uh, Troublesome Reign versus King John, or are they versions of the same play? I think I would say they're versions of the same
Mhm.
play, so they're a bit closer than that.
Yeah.
Um,
Yes. Yeah, I would definitely say they're a lot closer than The Troublesome Reign of King John is to Shakespeare's King John. Um, one of the interesting things about the revisions to this play is how many of those revisions actually cluster around Eleanor of Gloucester and Margaret of Anjou. And I know that that has led several different editors to suggest that these characters may have been either primarily written by, or at the very least revised by Shakespeare when the play was later revised for inclusion in the first folio. Now, how much revision was just Shakespeare? We don't know. How much revision involved any of the other playwrights who might have been involved in the original, the Quarto text? We don't know. But it is true that the first part of the contention bears a much closer relationship to Henry VI than, for instance, the famous victories of Henry V to Shakespeare's Henry V, or the troublesome reign of King John to Shakespeare's King John.
great,
Um,
thank
yeah.
you. And we've got a couple of questions now about the women characters. James, hi James. He asks, do we know anything about the boy actors who played these strong roles in the history plays? And that is, I think that's such an interesting question. Alongside other plays, we think might be in the ensemble at the same time. Although your point might be that these come a bit later, whether parts of women don't seem as strong. You know, if you were thinking
Mm,
about Julia and Sylvia, say, in Two
yeah.
Gentlemen of Verona, which you were talking about as another sort of contemporaneous early play, they they feel a bit to have different expectations of the actor than do Eleanor
Yes.
and Margaret.
Yeah, I think honestly, I think maybe you'd probably find a bit of a closer analog if you're looking at even a character like Juliet, who's a little bit later, obviously, but you can see kind of a lot of that. There's a certain way that both Eleanor and Margaret command the stage every time that they're on it. And even when they're not speaking, like Eleanor has this entire scene where she does not speak at all, but she is right there in the center of the action, and all of the action is revolving around her. This is the scene where the supposed witchcraft actually takes place. I think she has one line, maybe two lines at most, but she is still very much the central figure of that scene. And then later on with Margaret, Margaret just, she takes over. Every single character just sort of defers to her by the end of the play. She becomes the leader of Henry's faction. Henry is no longer the leader of his faction, it's entirely Margaret. And by the time we get into Henry VI, Part 3, Margaret is the primary antagonist, and all of the Yorkist forces. Every time that they're talking about the other side, they're talking about we need to fight Margaret. We need to fight Margaret. So she really does become this kind of all-powerful figure.
Great. And we've got a question about the two women as contrasting models of female ambition. One politically dominant, the other balanced in aspirations, but both ultimately faced public humiliation and containment. Given this pattern, can Shakespeare meaningfully be called a proto-feminist? Let's just
Mm.
leave that question there.
Well, it's hard to say because I do think that Margaret in particular is an incredibly powerful character. And I think most of her power, rather than being political, is actually rhetorical. And of course, it is always worth keeping in mind these are characters in a play, and therefore their power derives as much from their effect on the audience as it does from their impact on the action within the play. So when you're looking at a character like Margaret, on the one hand, you can say, yes, her political power is constantly being constrained. All of these men around her, many of whom are a lot less competent than her, are constantly coming in and telling her what to do. But Margaret also has this undercurrent throughout the entire play where she does not listen to any of them. And it is abundantly clear to the audience, even if she is not the one speaking to them directly. It is abundantly clear that Margaret does not care what any of these men think of her. Margaret is going to do whatever she wants, and the only person whose opinion she even vaguely cares about is Henry's. And even that is very, very conditional, depending on whether or not he is agreeing with her at the time. But I think when you look at Margaret over the entire arc of the four plays, by the time she gets to Richard III, she is one of the most powerful forces arrayed against him, not politically, but rhetorically. And in terms of the history that he is trying to erase and that she is trying to preserve.
Mm. That's such a great way of thinking about that question and reminding us that the impact on the audience is as important as the sort of impact within the fiction that's being presented on stage. Shabanka's got another question, which is an interesting point about an anachronism. Hume refers to the Duchess as Her Majesty when the Tudors were the first monarchs to be addressed thus. And he sort of extrapolates from that is this sort of a play either is this a playwright either stuck in his own moment or a play that is in some way really about its own moment rather than the historical past?
I think it's definitely both. I think partly it's just this is how you address a monarch, and this is how one would expect someone to be addressed as a monarch. But also, yes, I mean there were a number of sort of I wouldn't go so far as to say witchcraft scares, but there were witchcraft scandals that happened a number of times in the 1590s. And they were kind of sensationalized. You'd get broadsheet ballads about them. You'd get pamphlets about them, things like that. There's the play The Witch of Edmonton. There's um, all kinds of kind of popular media circulating around witchcraft. And so I do think that to some extent has to do with it. But yeah, probably the use of Your Majesty has as much to do with sort of Shakespeare wanting his audience to be aware of what exactly what the implications are. Where because Your Grace at that point in time could refer to a duke, it could refer to an earl, it could refer to several different levels of nobility that are not explicitly the monarch. And so in order to make it clear to the audience, even if it's not historically accurate, I could see why he would have made that choice.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I mean, I suppose historical drama is sort of always about the now, isn't it? It's always got
Yeah.
that double take that it's partly about the past and partly about the present. And you're right, Shabanka, that sometimes an anachronism, wittingly or unwittingly, shifts us between them.
Yeah.
There's one question I've been saving till last, Kavita, because I know you're going to really love it.
Hmm.
Um, this is about the Wars of the Roses, the Henry VI plays, inspiring George R. Martin.
Yay.
Do you think Shakespeare would have appreciated a modern adaptation like Game of Thrones? I might just say
Absolutely.
we haven't got. You've done this brilliantly because this will start Kavita on the most extraordinary, wonderful. This is the person in the world to ask this question of. So we've got it. Over to you.
Yes, absolutely. I do think that Shakespeare would have absolutely loved this ridiculous kind of blood-soaked family saga that also had dragons in it. I mean, it's such a good story, and it is such a kind of compelling type of drama that is both it's historically inspired, but it is very clearly not historically based. And I think that is what's actually happening in a number of Shakespeare's tragedies, which are themselves not historically based, but perhaps historically inspired. You look at something like Hamlet, which was almost certainly based on a play by Thomas Kyd, which was almost certainly based on a completely different thing in what was the name? I don't remember the exact chronicle, but there was a Danish chronicle story about a prince and his uncle. And so when you take these kind of bare bones narratives and you build out from them and you get these incredibly complicated, thorny family stories, I do think that that was something that Shakespeare loved to write. He keeps coming back to these family dynamics, these moments where power and emotion are constantly in tension with one another. Because there is no conflict that is going to be as bloody as one that is within a single family,
Hmm.
because you're looking at people who just know each other far, far, far too well.
Yeah, the family really is the site of sort of trauma and drama, isn't it, for Shakespeare in a way that it isn't necessarily for other playwrights. Yeah, that's so interesting. I don't think Johnson is very family-ish, is he?
Yeah.
Ben Jonson. Um,
Hmm.
I think about that odd collection of people all living in a house together in The Alchemist. That's a very sort of
Yes.
queer family version, which
Hmm.
is not really very Shakespearean. That's
Yeah.
that's absolutely fabulous, Kavita. We're going to sort of come, I think, to a conclusion.
Hmm.
I was going to ask you if you had advice or recommendations for what people might look at, read, look out for, try and watch or something if they wanted to go further with this play and with some of the conversation that we've been having?
There are a bunch of wonderful productions of this play that are available, and it is actually kind of surprising how many of them there are. There is, of course, like the BBC did their sort of collected works of Shakespeare. The versions of the Henry VI plays are from the very early 1980s, and they were all done by the same director. So it's actually a really wonderful kind of single overarching plot line. You start with Henry VI Part One, you go all the way through to Richard III. It's the same cast. Everyone is doubled and the same set, the same aesthetic. And also, it is probably the most frightening ending to Richard III that I have ever seen in my life. Um, there's also there are a number of other productions. The problem is that a lot of modern productions chop up Henry VI parts one and part two in particular. Part three tends to get left alone, mostly because there's so much Richard in part three, that part three ended up getting kind of interpolated into productions of Richard III in the 18th and 19th centuries. So people are a little more comfortable with part three than they are with part two and part one. And part one especially just gets absolutely just chopped up. Um, I know that one of the more recent versions from 2012 or not 2012 2016, the Hollow Crown, the Wars of the Roses, they did actually end up chopping up significant portions of Henry VI Part Two, including the entirety of Cade's Rebellion that got cut, which I'm still not entirely sure why they did that, but I'm assuming it was for reasons of time. Um, I One of the best productions that I ever saw was when the RSC did the full cycle in 2008 and 2009. They did all of the plays again, the same cast, full doubling the whole way through. Um, and it was absolutely incredible. There are production companies who do the plays. It is comparatively rare, um, but they but you can occasionally find production companies that will do all of them. One I actually will recommend is an audio broadcast. So this was a theater company out of Washington, D.C. called Brave Spirits Theater. You can find it on YouTube. You can find it on Spotify, any of the sort of podcasting apps. They did an entire cycle of Shakespeare's history plays, including all three parts of Henry VI. And I can definitely say that their text for 2 Henry VI is correct because I was the one who edited it. So um, I can
Brilliant.
definitely say they used it.
That's fantastic to hear that there are productions in different formats that people can access.
Yes.
Andrea, under the guise of the authoritative guise of the British Shakespeare Association, has agreed about the 1983 productions. Says don't bother with the Hollow Crown. So we'll have that disagreement later. As you say, it's
Yeah.
very, very striking. I'm sure you're right that time was what got rid of the Jack Cade, but
I'm
it's so political.
sure.
It's very
Mhm.
it's very, very strange indeed. Yeah, I'd loved hearing about those productions. I would just add um, a book I have really enjoyed and is still unfortunately very timely is Stephen Greenblatt's book Tyrant. And
Mhm.
he is really, really good on the Henry VI plays and sort of on stuff we've been talking about, really, sort of power back vacuum, the idea that people are puppeted by powerful people and made to feel that
Mhm.
their legitimate concerns are cared about by people above them when really they're just being used. And although
Yeah.
he doesn't, he is much too elegant and genteel, really, a critic to make that parallel over explicit. It's very, very
Mm.
beautifully done for where we are in the 2020s. So Greenblatt's book Tyrant, I would recommend. Um,
Yes.
Kavita, that's been an absolutely fabulous conversation. Thank you so much for your introduction to Henry VI Part Two, which I'm really pleased to have shared with people on this call. And we'll look forward to seeing you all next month. Thank you.
Thank you so much.